Welcome back to Superbly Said, our space for advanced English vocabulary and phrases. Today, we are critiquing an English language lesson slide deck submitted by a curriculum designer, which introduces 9 advanced conversational idioms and features a BBC comedy clip.
Yeah, and quickly, just for some context, this is from a SpeakDuo lesson. You can actually go to SpeakDuo.com to meet new people from around the world who are, practicing English on video calls to become more confident with their speaking abilities.
Right, exactly. So jumping right in, the material here actually has a solid foundation, especially the integration of the AI pronunciation feedback, but there are several structural and pedagogical opportunities to really elevate it.
The current lesson structure introduces a strong, engaging thematic hook at the beginning, but totally fails to carry that contextual thread through the core vocabulary sections.
Yeah, the Hugh Laurie comedy clip is brilliant, but then it's just gone.
Exactly, because the vocabulary, idioms are completely separated from that Hugh Laurie comedy hook. The initial engagement drops off. So students are forced to learn phrases in a vacuum, rather than within a memorable, entertaining narrative.
It's like handing a student a bunch of puzzle pieces without showing him the picture on the box. They jump straight into generic icebreakers about driving a car or using a phone at work.
Right, which totally kills the momentum. The creator should weave the opening comedy theme throughout the entire lesson to create a unified, cohesive learning experience.
So instead of generic questions, keep them in that Hugh Laurie sandbox.
Exactly. Contextualize the idioms within the BBC comedy clip. For instance, ask the students to describe a sketch where a character needs to get cracking on something before a deadline, or how a comedic misunderstanding perfectly illustrates a gray area.
That makes so much sense. They could even build an ongoing story across the slides, right? Just to keep that thread alive.
Yeah, absolutely. These are just a few ways to tie the theme together, but it anchors the vocabulary and episodic memory.
Okay, but even with that theme, students eventually need to know how to use these phrases in the real world, which brings us to the definitions provided in the deck. Defining to blow your own trumpet, just as speaking proudly about successes, isn't that a little too simplistic? If they just want to get the hang of it, does adding nuance overwhelm them?
Well, no, actually. The definitions provided in the material are accurate, but they miss a critical opportunity to explore the situational nuances that advanced learners require to achieve true fluency.
So the flatness is actually a liability here.
A huge one. The straightforward, flat definitions don't help a learner distinguish when or how to use an idiom appropriately. The material totally fails to clarify the tone, so it leaves students unsure how phrases sound in formal, informal, professional, or academic contexts.
Right, because speaking proudly could just be, sharing a good grade. It doesn't capture the arrogance risk of blowing your own trumpet.
Precisely. You need to incorporate comparative examples that highlight nuanced differences between similar phrases and demonstrate their usage across distinct, real-world scenarios.
So how do we do that for blowing your own trumpet?
You contrast it with a similar phrase, like patting yourself on the back, and explain the difference in audience and tone. Patting yourself on the back is internal, private satisfaction. Blowing your own trumpet is vocal, public, and risky.
Ah, got it. So you'd show them how to soften it with the boss. Like, I don't mean to blow my own trumpet, but my strategy increased sales.
Yes, exactly. And contrast that with an IELTS speaking part 2 response, where confidence is rewarded. A student might say, without wishing to blow my own trumpet, I managed the entire charity event flawlessly. That ensures they grasp the exact situational weight.
That's a great distinction. What about the phrases dealing with urgency and competency? Like to get cracking on something versus to get the hang of something.
Right. So let's look at to get cracking. The deck says it just means beginning to work quickly. But if we don't explore the tone, a student might use it interchangeably with a formal verb, like to commence.
Oh, wow. Yeah, let's commence the data analysis sounds incredibly robotic.
Exactly. To commence is rigid and academic. But to get cracking carries a specific informal urgency and enthusiasm. A boss might encourage a team by saying, we have a massive deadline on Friday, so let's get cracking on the data analysis. You would never use that in a formal legal setting.
Okay. And for getting the hang of something, the deck defines it as learning a task until it's easy.
Which misses the journey. You have to contrast it with to master something. Getting the hang of a task implies reaching a baseline competency after an initial struggle. Mastering implies total perfection.
So with colleagues, you'd say, it's taking a few days, but I'm finally getting the hang of this new software.
Right. And for IELTS, maybe it took me months of practice to get the hang of the local dialect.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I notice the deck defines to drool over something as simply looking at something with obvious desire. I feel like that is dangerously close to just admiring.
It really is. And if a student says they are drooling over their boss's new presentation, that's going to cause a horrible HR situation.
Yeah, highly awkward.
Exactly. You have to contrast drooling over with admiring. Admiring is polite, distant. Drooling over something is exaggerated, visceral, and almost comedic.
So it's highly informal?
Very. With colleagues, you could say, we spent the entire lunch break drooling over the photos of the new corporate retreat in Hawaii. Or in IELTS, walking past the bakery, I found myself drooling over the display of fresh pastries.
Right. Not for a performance review. And we see that same kind of physical intensity with to be tied up in knots, right? The deck just says feeling anxious or worried.
Which is so flat. Being tied up in knots is highly physical. It's that literal twisting feeling in your stomach before a big event. It's way more evocative than general stress.
Like telling a colleague, I was tied up in knots waiting for the client to approve the final budget.
Exactly. By explicitly defining that physical sensation, you give the student a much richer vocabulary palette.
Okay, let's hit the last group of idioms, which deal with ambiguity. A gray area, to take someone for granted, to turn up somewhere, and to give in to something. The deck just translates a gray area as an unclear situation.
And focusing solely on unclear completely overlooks the regulatory or ethical nature of the phrase. You have to contrast it with a total mystery.
Right, a mystery means you have no facts at all.
Exactly. A gray area has facts, but the rules governing them are overlapping or ambiguous. So with a boss, you might discuss policy. Allowing contractors to use our internal software is a bit of a gray area.
Or for IELTS, the regulation of social media data remained a significant gray area in international law.
Spot on. And look at to take someone for granted. The slide says it's failing to appreciate someone because you expect them to be there. You'd contrast this with to underestimate, right?
Yeah, because underestimating is doubting someone's skill, but taking them for granted is ignoring their consistent value.
Right. So to colleagues, we definitely took the fast office Wi-Fi for granted until the servers went down. It's an assumption of permanence.
Okay, and for to turn up somewhere, the deck says arriving unexpectedly. I'd contrast that with simply to arrive.
Exactly. Arriving is neutral, scheduled. Turning up holds a casual, sometimes disruptive surprise. You wouldn't say the CEO turned up to a planned board meeting, but you might tell a colleague, I couldn't believe the missing vendor just turned up at the loading dock.
And briefly, for to give in to something, that's a total surrender to a temptation, whereas compromising involves mutual professional concessions.
Exactly. Knowing these nuances keeps them safe in a corporate environment.
Okay, so knowing the nuance is half the battle, but let's look at the structure and flow of the lesson itself. The pacing moves directly from introducing these idioms straight into 10 to 12-minute open breakout room discussions. How does the designer ensure students are actually ready to use the words before they're thrown into a room together?
Well, right now they don't. The transition from passive learning to open discussion lacks an intermediate, structured activity to actively test and solidify the student's comprehension.
So jumping straight into breakout rooms assumes immediate mastery?
Which is totally unrealistic. Without a testing mechanism to reinforce the memory, students are highly likely to misuse the idioms or honestly just default to simpler vocabulary they already know.
Right, they just won't use the new words at all.
Exactly. You have to insert a dynamic, multiple-choice active recall quiz right before the breakout sessions to serve as a low-stakes comprehension check.
A multiple-choice quiz? But in your notes, you suggested using highly exaggerated distractors for the wrong answers. Doesn't that make it too easy? Shouldn't the wrong answers be close in meaning?
That is a great question. In cognitive science, there's a phenomenon known as semantic interference. If you are testing a brand new idiom and your wrong answers are just slight variations of the correct answer, you actually end up confusing the student.
Oh, I see. They internalize the wrong nuance just by reading it.
Exactly. The goal of this intermediate step isn't to trick them. It's to force their brain to actively pull the core concept out of their memory without creating negative interference.
Okay, well, let's actually run through this quiz exactly as you designed it, because I think it perfectly illustrates this.
Let's do it.
All right, so listeners, feel free to pause the podcast here if you need to think about the answer as we go through these. Question 1. What is the best definition for the expression to get the hang of something? Option A, to learn how to do a specific task so incredibly well that performing it eventually becomes genuinely, totally easy. Option B, to deliberately, permanently, completely ignore absolutely all incredibly difficult professional management guidelines. Or option C, to physically, systematically, efficiently, strongly, forcefully, accurately, heavily, deeply destroy an old, firm structure.
And obviously the answer is option A, to learn how to do a specific task until it becomes genuinely easy. Because remember, to get the hang of something implies reaching that baseline competency, like we talked about with getting the hang of the new Office software.
Right, you just immediately rule out destroying a firm structure. Okay, question 2. How is the idiom to blow your own trumpet accurately defined? Option A, to completely accidentally, deeply, aggressively, absolutely, permanently destroy a delicate musical historical artifact. Option B, to intentionally, openly, actively, proudly, and confidently continuously speak about your own huge abilities or success. Or option C, to remarkably, suddenly, unexpectedly, totally, forcefully, heavily, deeply, firmly, powerfully declare an office strike now.
The correct answer here is option B, to intentionally, proudly, and confidently speak about your own success. Remember the nuance here. It's public and vocal, unlike just patting yourself on the back. It's like when you tell your boss about a strategy that increased sales without trying to sound arrogant.
Yeah, definitely not declaring an office strike. Okay, next one. If someone decides to get cracking on something, what exactly are they doing? Option A, to completely, intentionally, thoroughly, forcefully, firmly, effectively, securely, safely, heavily avoid strict management. Option B, to rapidly, violently, physically, accurately, permanently, severely, entirely, completely, intensely shatter a heavy window. Or option C, to immediately, successfully, deeply, energetically, and remarkably, incredibly quickly begin actively working on a task.
And the answer is option C, to energetically and incredibly quickly begin actively working on a task. We use to get cracking on something to convey that informal urgency, totally different from the rigidness of commencing a task, like getting cracking on that data analysis before Friday.
Exactly. All right, moving on. What does a person mean when they refer to a gray area? Option A, a highly specific situation that remains totally unclear simply because the direct facts do not provide firm answers. Option B, a totally remarkably, heavily, unexpectedly dangerous, severe mechanical failure resulting from severely bad motor parts. Or option C, a highly secretive, incredibly, totally successful strategy widely utilized by senior corporate executives in an office.
The answer is option A, a situation that remains totally unclear because the facts don't provide firm answers. Because a gray area isn't a total mystery, it's about overlapping rules, like the regulation of social media data in international law we mentioned earlier.
Right, it's about the ambiguity. Okay, question 5. Which of the following describes what it means to take someone or something for granted? Option A, to intentionally, confidently, safely, efficiently, totally, firmly, effectively, completely, securely, formally transfer files. Option B, to deeply, foolishly, completely fail to truly appreciate a person because you totally expect them to always be around. Or option C, to aggressively, completely, deliberately, successfully, deeply, heavily, confidently, totally, professionally block decisions.
And the answer is option B, to completely fail to truly appreciate someone because you expect them to always be around. Remember, taking something for granted is an assumption of permanence, not doubting their skill. Like when we took the fast office Wi-Fi for granted until it crashed.
Yeah, I love the distractor of formally transferring files for that one. Okay, question 6. What occurs when a person manages to turn up somewhere? Option A, to deliberately, forcefully, completely, intensely, repeatedly, aggressively, effectively, totally amplify a specific volume. Option B, to systematically, incredibly, practically, officially, entirely, totally, permanently, completely, successfully fix an error. Or option C, to surprisingly, casually, miraculously, suddenly, completely, thoroughly, unexpectedly, finally arrive at a new destination.
The answer is option C, to surprisingly or unexpectedly arrive at a new destination. Turning up somewhere holds that casual, sometimes disruptive surprise, completely different from a scheduled arrival, like a missing vendor turning up at the loading dock.
Yep. Question 7. What does it mean if you happen to be tied up in knots? Option A, to consistently, profoundly, intensely, incredibly feel deeply, remarkably anxious, thoroughly nervous, or very worried. Option B, to carefully, completely, efficiently, accurately, securely, totally, heavily, properly, successfully, safely lock an entrance. Or option C, to deliberately, heavily, intentionally, repeatedly, severely, openly, totally, fully, intensely, aggressively break clear law.
And the answer is option A, to feel deeply, remarkably anxious or nervous. But remember, our nuance, being tied up in knots, describes that literal twisting, physical sensation in your stomach, not just general stress, like waiting for a client to approve a budget.
Okay, last one. What happens when someone actively starts to drool over something? Option A, to completely, entirely, accidentally, heavily, terribly, violently, physically, suddenly, highly dangerously spill a coffee. Option B, to deeply, intensely, obviously, passionately, constantly, actively, correctly, openly look at an item with pure admiration. Or option C, to intentionally, formally, aggressively, entirely surrender.
The correct answer is option B, to deeply and passionately look at an item with pure admiration. But as we discussed, to drool over something is visceral and highly informal. You drool over pastries in a bakery window. You don't do it at a formal performance review.
Exactly. Running through that quiz, you can really see how the absurd distractors remove the stress. The student isn't sweating over subtle definitions. They are looking at aggressively shatter a heavy window and thinking, well, it's definitely not that.
Right. It directly tests whether they have separated the idiomatic meaning from the literal words. The teacher gives the students time to think, provides the answers, and reminds them of the nuance. It takes maybe 4 minutes, but it completely changes the dynamic of the breakout rooms.
Because they enter the room feeling confident. They've locked in the meaning safely.
Exactly. They have a safe environment right before they enter the wild west of open conversation.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic breakdown. So let's quickly recap the 3 primary takeaways from today's critique. First, the material needs to connect the vocabulary back to the engaging Hugh Laurie thematic hook. Don't abandon the narrative. Second, provide contextual nuance and contrasting examples for advanced learners. We have to show them the difference between blowing your own trumpet and patting yourself on the back. And third, insert an active recall multiple choice quiz with exaggerated options right before the breakout sessions.
Yeah, the actionable advice is super straightforward. Rewrite those generic icebreaker questions to fit the BBC comedy theme. Add the similar but different comparison sentences into the slides. And build out that multiple choice quiz with the bizarre distractors to bridge into the group work.
Absolutely. We warmly invite the listener to implement these structural changes and submit their revised curriculum back into the critique for further review. Because ultimately, handing advanced learners isolated vocabulary without a unifying narrative or a recall mechanism is exactly like handing them puzzle pieces without the box. Once you weave the theme together and test it properly, the whole picture finally clicks into place.